Welcome back to The Line. It was a big week in political news across the state. Former Governor Gary Johnson announced he will run for Senate as a Libertarian. Johnson ran for president as the Libertarian nominee in 2016. And there are some other news stories that caught our attention this week that we'll get into in just a moment. Dan Boyd, I want to start with you. Johnson's announcement, is this a surprise?
It would have been a surprise a few months ago. I mean, we've been hearing it now, kind of the rumors, it's been building, so I don't think it was a surprise that he finally decided to enter the race. I think he saw the opportunity to replace, another candidate, Aubrey Dunn, on the ballot, so he didn't have to go through the whole signatures and petitions and all that. And I think he kind of saw it as an opportunity, to get back into the political scene and into the spotlight. And for our purposes, it kind of makes the race more interesting, even though it does feature an incumbent, Martin Heinrich, who's probably still the odds-on favorite in the race. But it does, anytime you have someone like Gary Johnson, a former governor, it kind of livens things up, and especially with him running as a libertarian, as a kind of third-party candidate.
Carolyn, sometimes those third-party candidates push different issues, kind of change the conversation in a race. Do you see that happening here?
Definitely, and I think it'll be good. I think it'll be good for the race. Heinrich's going to have to step up and maybe rethink, because maybe it's a slam dunk, but at least now he has another voice that he has to answer to. So I think it'll be good.
Merritt, we keep hearing more and more New Mexicans, especially younger New Mexicans, are registering as independents, are willing to hear from different parties. Do you think that this is a sign of things changing in 2018?
Well, absolutely, and I think everyone agrees at this point, Johnson entering the race, the biggest impact is going to be on the Republican candidate. And New Mexico Republicans have not been well organized for a long time, and it's fractious, it's divided. The organization of the Libertarian split off, to me, is kind of like Republican refugees. So I think it's an interesting trend, and being able to field a candidate who has run at the national level, knows how to campaign, I think will be an interesting lesson for other folks. And while it may not be successful in this race, I think it will give some gravitas to the Libertarian Party. And I definitely see in the East Mountains and beyond the Estancia Valley, House District 50, we have an independent running against an incumbent Democrat with no Republican. That race is much more interesting because it's a two-person race. And so I think we can be a little more predictable about vote counting. The numbers are very interesting. As I see it, Jared Applewhite, who is working hard and a very credible candidate, he needs to turn about 1,000 Democrat votes in his district, and I think he can pull it off.
I think though some people, the Libertarians are on the ballot this year as a major party because of the 2016 elections. I think some people maybe expected even more of a showing from Libertarians this year. Do you think it's been a little underwhelming?
For New Mexico, no. I'm impressed they had a convention. I thought that was tremendous. And Republicans I feel like Republicans in New Mexico had gotten very well organized to the point of being able to pick up the House in 2014. Unfortunately, that wasn't able to be sustained, and I think it's a good groundswell.
Laura, do you think Libertarians are kind of changing the political conversation this year? Are they having an impact?
I think Gary Johnson is going to. I'm not sure Libertarians as a party are going to. I mean, I have this argument with my husband all the time because he doesn't like the two-party system, and that's what we have. And so he really thinks that it's important to have other options. He's a declined estate, registered declined estate. And so I think he represents a growing group of people, though, that don't really want to affiliate with any single party. And I think the Libertarian Party, as a party, I think has some of the, could potentially draw some of those people in. But I agree with Merritt. I think it's actually, at least at the Senate race, it's more of an issue for the Republican that's in the race. I think that's where you're going to find votes that come across. I really think that it's extremely late for somebody to jump into a race. I mean, we're only 2.5 months out at this point from the election, and so to be able to raise the money to get on TV and to do all of those things to reach vast majority of the people who will likely, already vote and know who they're going to vote for is very difficult. So we're talking about, I think for Martin Heinrich, it gives him incentive and a reason to raise money, which he hasn't been doing as much lately. There's been, I think, a lot more attention on the other candidates in the races at other positions. And so you're going to see him start to sort of turn that up a lot higher. But I think one of the interesting things about Martin Heinrich is he played in the primary in a way that affected him, because he actually endorsed Veneklassen in the state land office race in the primary. And that made a lot of Democrats really unhappy with him, people who were supporting Garcia Richards and who were supporting also George Munoz. and felt like his involvement in that race was unnecessary, and he had a personal connection, I think, to Vanna Clausen, as well as a values-based connection on the environment. But it really made a lot of people unhappy, and I don't know if that's going to translate into votes for Johnson, but I think that he's going to pick up more votes than we expect, probably.
Yeah, we also had a big endorsement from Democratic ex-governor Jerry Apodaca, father of former gubernatorial candidate Jeff Apodaca, endorsed Republican Steve Pierce. What do you think about that announcement?
I think it's a hugely disappointing move for a former governor to do, and I think it's just personal politics at its worst. I mean, really, I don't see that any Democrat, certainly staunch Democrats, are going to suddenly vote for Pierce because of Apodaca. I think it's sadly a reflection of the Apodaca campaign not being able to mend fences after a very difficult primary. And he took a very aggressive stance against Michelle Lujan Grisham. Michelle Lujan Grisham had a lot of the money, a lot of the support sewn up very early on, and it was looking like she would end up winning out of that primary. But they really did very little to try to mend fences afterwards. And I think the party, in general, I think both parties try to mend fences after the fact, and you don't want to see this sort of an outcome. I don't think it's going to make any difference, except it makes them look like they really are not good Democrats. They're just not holding on to their core beliefs about being a Democrat if they're willing to just, jump ship and go to the Republicans.
Dan, have you heard some reactions to this announcement?
I have. I mean, I've heard some similar to what Laura said. I think it does show. I mean, there are definitely factions within the Republican Party, but also factions within the Democratic Party. I mean, and this should be a good year for Democrats, given some of the national mood and kind of the tailwinds. But I think there are issues like that of kind of divides within the party. And I do think, also for Michelle Lujan Grisham, that she hasn't been able to make amends with certain parts, the Apodaca faction and some other factions. And then you have the whole kind of Bernie Sanders followers who are maybe reluctant to follow more moderate Democrats. Certainly in the legislature, you see a lot of different Democrats. So I do think, looking ahead, if Michelle were to win, and to having a Democratic legislature and a governor, that you'd see even more of those kind of splits in the legislature. And so that's something to keep an eye on.
Merritt, what do you think? Personal politics or kind of crossing the aisle in endorsements?
What politics aren't personal? And what I see is, while there's certainly, as I mentioned, a fracture in the Republican Party, I think the Democrats in New Mexico are seeing not necessarily a fracture yet, but a fissure between, I think, very, very traditional, longtime New Mexican Democrats, John Arthur Smith, Mary Kay Papen, and more kind of a new generation of Democrats who may be more progressive, Brian Egolf, and seeing two, I think, what I would call pro-business Democrats losing the primary, Debbie Rodella and Carl Trujillo. I just think I think that's an indicator that also some of the more moderate Democrat factions may not be happy with the way the direction the party is going if it's going to the left.
Andrea Romero, who's running in District 46, beat incumbent Representative Carl Trujillo in the primary. The Santa Fe New Mexican reported this week that an audit of the Regional Coalition of Los Alamos National Laboratory Communities found improper expenditure payments, including to her as a former executive director. Do you think that's going to be a big deal in that race?
I think the biggest deal is going to be for RCLC. And I think this could be the end of RCLC. And I think the problem is this regional coalition of governments around Los Alamos never had a strong enough charter. When you have funding without a really strong charter or organization, it's hard to figure out what to spend your money on. I don't think that excuses the behavior, and I think it could be a problem for the race. But my hope is that it's also the end of RCLC.
Carolyn, I've been kind of watching the local, the statewide races, and I'm just wondering if voters are excited for the 2018 midterms. What's your sense of it right now in August?
Well, my kind of contact is more with, the alibi readers, which are more of the younger readers, and you see a lot of excitement on one hand to get ready and get voted and get out there, but then you also see why, and I don't like any of these candidates. So I think we have some work to do as political parties to really reach out to bring in those voters and bring them together. And I mean, I don't talk to a lot of grown-ups about voting because I'm more focused on the young people, but I think we have a lot of work to do to bring them together,
Dan, midterms usually turnout's a little lower. Do you think 2018 will be any different?
I think it probably will be lower. There's not a presidential race, obviously. I do think with the governor's race, a contested one, now a U.S. Senate race, that could. But I do think that also, like this RCLC issue, folks I think get kind of turned off by misuse of public funds, or spending $28 for a shot of whiskey, things like that. And I think that can lead to some disenchantment, especially given the recent history in New Mexico with some of the public corruption cases. So there will be also a constitutional amendment on the ballot to create a new state ethics commission. I do think, kind of restoring public trust a little bit, gets more people out to vote. There was a pretty high turnout for the primary, so we'll see. I mean, I think it could be a decent turnout, but I'm not expecting a huge wave of voters.
Laura, what do you think? Are folks excited about the governor's race, other races in New Mexico this year?
Well, traditionally, campaigns don't get started until after Labor Day. I mean, that's sort of how it is. It's been extended more and more every year, it seems like recently. So I think that we're still in that sort of summer, whatever it is, going back to school, and people aren't really paying attention as much as perhaps they will. But I think the fact that you have a contested gubernatorial race will make a big difference. Now with a contested Senate race, I mean, whether you're pro, Johnson or not, having him in the race adds some excitement to that particular race. And so I think you'll see more people potentially voting. But still, midterm elections just aren't as, they don't generate as much excitement as the presidential elections. But we've also seen across the country a wave of people going to the polls more and more because of a lot of what's happening in the White House. And so you may see some of that as well. So there'll be some coattails with regard to anti-Trump sort of sentiment, but also the top two candidates, Pierce and Lujan Grisham, are going to make a difference in terms of having people come to the polls.
Merritt, you mentioned that District 50 race that it sounds like you're going to be watching. Do you think there's some of those local races are going to get folks excited when they're meeting people in their community who are running?
I hope so. I think there's some other interesting races down in the Southwest, in particular at House District 32 in Deming. Candy Sweetser is the moderate Democrat incumbent, but we have a physician, a bilingual physician from the area, Laura Boyd, who understands ranchers. She's working very hard. I think that will be a very interesting race. Former State Senator Lee Cotter is challenging Rudy Martinez in House District 39. That's very interesting because right now Representative Martinez is embroiled in a lawsuit with the county hospital, and so those two seats could be in play. And if Applewhite is successful in 50, everyone thinks we're going to have, there's no way there's going to be any progress for Republicans in the House, but the loss of one Democrat seat and pickup of 2 R seats could be a big game changer.
Absolutely. We'll keep an eye on that. We'll have to end it there in just a moment. We look at a proposal to build a tiny house village in Albuquerque.